Yeah, so we had an HDR KMS workshop this morning. I had a bunch of people there. I'm going to try to summarize a little bit. I don't think, the outcomes were terribly concrete, but it was good to get people in the same room talking about sort of, making sure we're avoiding all the stones in the water and, not crashing as we're trying to go through this and make this happen. The first thing I want to call out, Red Hat wants to do this Hackfest for GNOME with a focus on HDR, maybe some other display technologies. If you're interested in HDR stuff and you think you'd want to, participate, talk to Carlos Soriano Sanchez or maybe some of the other Red Hat folks who can connect you. That might happen next year, and maybe at that point, some of the pieces will start coming together. We'll see. We need people to work on stuff like this, though. Right now, there haven't been a ton of people working on HDR, at least in the public, but some have. These are roughly the people that were there. We might have missed some that joined later. But we've had Livio Abhinav. We had remotely Immersion with Simon Sir join Sebastian. Some other people. Laurent Pichard was there as well. I really value his input. So what do we talk about? A few concrete things, like I highlighted the inverse EOTF problem and sort of our preferred ideas. I think if we use that, take an EOTF and ask the driver to do an inverse, we really need somebody to code this and see how this looks in practice. So you'll see a running thread through this. Somebody needs to code and try this and, see if this looks acceptable or workable. And then enumerated transfer functions also work, but they're not a good fit for some compositors. Static versus dynamic block definition. Hardware might look different, and you might, currently in KMS, you have the color processing block sort of statically documented, this comes after this. Do we want to keep the static? Do we need to go make this dynamic? Well, I think, if hardware is sufficiently different and if compositors have a sufficiently different view of what needs to be done, then maybe this needs to be dynamic on some level. If compositors sort of are doing their color processing the same way, all of them, then maybe it doesn't need to be dynamic. And again, some of the compositor work isn't quite there yet, so maybe we'll still find out. We don't want to overcomplicate things unnecessarily, but this is something to keep an eye on. There's also some ideas for color pipeline arrangement, like for a model to deal with dynamic block stuff. Again, I think to really see how feasible this is, we need somebody, that somebody might be me or somebody else, to try and code something and at least, have an example that shows how this can look like in practice. Descriptive versus prescriptive API. Descriptive meaning we describe what the surface, blending space, and output space are. Prescriptive, we say, do this transform in this order. I think at the kernel API, we do need something that's prescriptive. I've sort of arrived at that a while back, and I haven't heard anything in today's workshop that really contradicts that. One thing to notice that a prescriptive model on the kernel side, it could support a descriptive model at a higher layer. So if you wanted that, there might be ways to abstract that or put that at an upper layer. Which brings me, I'm going to go to this slide right away. A Userspace Library could be such an example. There's lipliftoff, which is supposed to help for overlay planes, but really nobody's using it yet. I think Sway's starting to pull it in. So again, this could use help, and interested parties could work on this or pull this into compositors and maybe optimize the multiplane overlay portion of it. Something like that could be used to also abstract some of the color processing decisions away, so we don't have an extensively complicated API at the kernel level, but we can still do interesting things, just keep it all in user space. Again, something to explore, and somebody could code up a sketch and maybe try this out. Use cases, I'll get to this, I guess, almost last, but there's sort of, it was brought up that we need to look at use cases, right? We don't want to support everything under the sun, but we want to look at what's actually needed. And again, compositor work is still happening, Wayland protocol work is still happening. So we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, and we want to see what happens in that space, what compositors need, and use those use cases to kind of dictate what the kernel API is going to look like. And then, again, Hackfest if you're interested. Conclusion, yeah, there is some light at the end of the tunnel. We need Userspace before KMS. Don't rush KMS unless Userspace has figured out how to do HDR. Use cases should drive API. Hardware vendor optimizations are kind of important and nice, like that ability. We want an API that gives predictable results. A lot of this is vague again, but I think we could, code and try some of this stuff and see if this actually works out as we're moving forward. So there'll still be a long road, I think, for a KMS API, but things are moving in the right direction, mostly. All right.